Thank you so much, Dan, and good morning, everyone. Since Dan revealed one of my weak points, programmatic, I'm going to reveal one of Dan's weak points. Hope he's listening anyways. But that's dyslexia, because apparently Dan don't know how to spell my name, and I just noticed that. So on the other side it said Kolster. So I'm from Denmark, and Kolster means like a monastery, but my real name is Kolster, just so we got that cleared out, okay? Since we're here to talk about advertising for good and all of that stuff, how many of you went drinking last night? Did a few of you have a few drinks last night here at MadFest? A few of you? Can be honest. One, thank you. Great, okay. No, I'm just saying that as a disclaimer because I didn't drink anything at all. I have a sinus infection, so that's why my voice is... Don't think I was boozing last night. This just comes from, whatever. So anyways. A lot of talk about purpose, about doing good. Just got back from Cannes like a week ago. Seemed to be the sort of topic of the festival, right? Looking at the winners and all that stuff. Thanks for taking the front rows. Always the best seats in the house. Might win a book. So my beef with purpose, it does seem like purpose right now is a bit like Pokemon. Everybody is searching for it, but nobody really knows why. So it's not like all these brands, it's just like we've got to have a purpose, we've got to have beliefs, we've got to have values. And my journey, I started out about 12 years ago as a young copywriter. Any copywriters in the house? Copywriters? You just raise the hand all the time. I like you. You're the most interactive guy ever. Thank you so much. So I started as a copywriter, and sort of at the age of 30, we were in Copenhagen hosting the climate summit. You heard about the climate summit, right? It's kind of like, Friends, the series Friends, you keep watching, but not shit is happening, right? And the same happened with the climate summit. So obviously, I got extremely disappointed as a young, aspiring copywriter, and I thought to myself and asked myself the question, what the fuck can I do with the skill set that I have, with the brands that I work for, and with enormous influence? Again, remember this was a decade ago. So I wrote my first book called Goodvertising, and as you can see, a much younger Thomas, less gray hairs and all that stuff. But this was the time of Unilever, the Sustainable Living Plan, Patagonia, Dove's Real Beauty, all that stuff. And the interesting thing is that back then, when we did the research for the first book, it was so hard to find any good examples. Honestly, it was tough. Finding any brands that stood for something else than just selling, the hygiene pad with the best sucking blah, 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 or whatever it was, that was tough. But today, honestly, look at diversity at the moment, right? It's like every brand is sort of like trying to kind of grapple onto this little thing. And the tough thing is it's like chasing a rainbow. As soon as you reach the LGBTQ, there's a plus and there's all this other stuff. So at the moment, I started to sort of lose my belief in purpose. I started losing my belief in how we build brands, because it seemed like every time the brands was doing it, something was wrong. And right now it looks a little bit like this, right? Every brand kind of saying, look at me, we're doing all this shit for like ocean plastics, we're doing all this stuff for climate change. And it's just not believable, is it? Honestly. I see a few young people here, and I have two beautiful nieces, and the interesting thing is one is 18 and one is 11, right? The only thing they've experienced in their lifetime is companies that is to blame for environmental degradation, social injustice. That's the only thing they experienced in their lifetime. And the thing is, all they hear from these companies is, hey, look at us, we're saving the world, we're doing all this good stuff. Something just seems to be wrong, right? There's got to be something wrong with this approach. In a way, it's kind of like me being at a bar, I kick open the door and I say, hey, I'm the world's best lover. At some point, somebody in that bar is probably going to figure out I'm not. And the same thing happens with brands that take on that sort of hero cape and say, we're going to save the world. Take Patagonia as an example. We can't have a presentation about doing good without Patagonia. But I'm going to use them as a bad example, to be honest. Because if you really listen to what Patagonia is saying, we're in the business to save our home planet? Really? I mean, they sell t-shirts to people who are stuck in a one-bedroom apartment in London and just want a little bit of greenery. Seriously. So the problem is, I mean, if we took any brand and sat them down in a psychologist chair, I'm pretty sure that our psychologist would say either you're dealing with delusional or megalomaniac. So there's something wrong with this approach. I'm not saying that maybe Patagonia is doing this wrong. They sort of have this sort of legacy and the thrust to do this shit. But everybody who's trying to sort of copy the Patagonia model, because at the moment, the disappointing thing is what we're doing is not working. So over a decade of all this stuff, the only thing that's happening is people are not trusting us. So that's a shame, because we're jeopardizing all of this stuff. We're jeopardizing the movement that I was such a big, passionate believer in, because if we fail all of us. Every time a brand fucks up, it fucks it up for all of us. It fucks it up for our industry. Then there's the second thing, which is the business case. Because, we want to build brands that people love. We want to build brands that, hopefully people want to buy into Purposeful brands. And there's still this dilemma between what people say they want to buy. So, yeah, for sure, I want to buy that Oatly thing, But how many of us really follow through on that stuff? So it's a really, really interesting gap. This is from a survey from an organization called Sustainable Brands. And so there's a 39% gap. So how do we figure that out? If we can just figure out that 39%, we have a pretty good business case, right? But maybe it's not so strange, in fact, that we don't do what we're saying. Because by the end of the day, I don't know how many of you do New Year's resolutions. Some of you, yeah? So we all know what happens with New Year's resolutions, right? Like just a couple of weeks into January, it just seems like it's a new beginning to bad old habits, right? Not a lot is happening. Sneakers are still lying there in the corridor. We're not really going on that run. So just to get a bit of honest in this room, and I know there's a hell of a lot of noise in here, so I'm trying to do my best battling with the sinus infection and a running nose. But I want to hear from you guys, and I promise you, I'm going to share mine as well. I want to hear your New Year's resolutions. We're 6 months in. You still have 6 months to go. So I believe in you, okay? So what I want to do is, I want to hear you shout loud your New Year's resolution, okay? Gonna get really comfy, so you have things to talk about at the carnival later tonight, okay? So let's try it. 3, 2, 1. Wow. Looking at all you people, you're the most perfect crowd ever. Good looking, good bodies, everything is just perfect. Nothing to improve, I know. Let's try again, okay? 3, 2, 1. Perfect. That's the only time you didn't say anything. I get it. Yeah, I get it. So the one thing I wanted to change was sometimes obviously feeling bad about having to go on an airplane from Copenhagen to London and talking to you guys and all the emissions and all that stuff. So I thought, how can I lower my carbon footprint? And one of the things I thought was food. So the thing about food, as soon as I say Denmark and food, you're thinking about Noma and all that shit, right? Michelin star restaurants, yeah? Yeah. That's a fucking lie. When I grew up, it was horrendous. Honestly, like it was overboiled potatoes, it was broccoli that sort of tasted like salt water, it was like pork meat that was like more delicious than their soul. It's not good at all. So the kitchen I grew up in was not that interesting. So obviously I wanted to learn how to cook more plant-based. And one of the companies that I interviewed for my book, the latest book, The Hero Trap, was a company called Årstiderne, which in Danish means seasons. I'm sure you have a similar service. Basically what they do is they come with this box of farm fresh produce, but they also give you the recipe to do vegan or vegetarian or whatever you're into. The interesting thing is when I interviewed their CEO, he said not anything about creating a plant-based revolution or doing good for people on planet, all that shit we hear all the time. He talked about earth connection. And this was a thing each and every one of us had to find ourselves. We had to go on a journey together with this company to find that shit ourselves. And the interesting thing is when we talk about marketing, They don't have to pay me to share their stuff, because when I'm successful, when they actually help me create that vegan pie, I'm going to share the shit out of it on my Instagram channel because I'm super proud. Obviously, as we all know, probably the reality is a little bit like that, and that you won't see on Instagram. So the thing that's happening right now is that there's so many brands out there, if you think about it, that's pitching themselves as saints, as Mother Teresa's, as Gandhi, and all that stuff in the supermarket. So who do we believe? Who do we trust? And if you think about it, and I'll ask you guys a question later, because you also get the chance to ask me questions, but think about what brand, a leader, or organization who has in fact created real change in your life. Just think about that. What brand, leader, organization have created real change in your life? Because the thing is right now, if you look at how this market has changed, there's something wrong. Because, we moved from these sucking, annoying functional benefits, the hygiene pad that sucks like a hurricane or whatever it is, to emotional stuff, to societal stuff. And this was where my last book, Goodvertising, stopped. This was just adding green, sustainable, caring, all that stuff to every brand out there. But it doesn't seem like it has the same traction. When everybody is saying that, when everybody is claiming to have higher values, when everybody is trying to do bold, interesting actions, it's not cutting through in the marketplace. So the one thing I believe, as we are getting closer to what I would call a post-purpose market, is it's not about the why, the values, or the actions, it's about who you can help people become. Because this is where you can feel a difference. Årstiderne, the box company, they helped me on my journey, so I'm thankful. I get it, they created change in my life. So how can you create brands that help their customers be healthier, less biased, or whatever it is? And it's a fundamentally different way of looking at leadership, because the one brand is like, hey, look at me, like I'm Jesus, I'm gonna fucking save the world. And the other brand is more like a coach that are like, so, what's your New Year's resolution? How can I help you? And all those New Year's resolutions are things a brand can generally help us with. So I know that Dan promised you a masterclass, and I think that's just a way of making it more interesting. But a 45-minute masterclass, with a Danish guy with sinus infection, not going to happen. But I'm going to share you a few sort of models and methodologies, and then you can take those home, and hopefully you can use them going forward. So one thing I really wanted to understand on this journey was, how do we build meaningful brands? How do brands create a meaningful difference in our lives? So I looked to psychotherapy and coaching, because both those disciplines are goal-oriented, right? And so I created this model called the Arrow. And the Arrow asks 4 fundamental questions. The first 2 ones should be pretty simple. So what is it that you do? So that's the product or the service. So maybe it's the iPhone or whatever it might be. The second question is, how unique in delivering your product or service? So maybe it's more convenient, maybe it's because it's British, whatever it might be. But the third question is really interesting, because for those of you who, as I was back in the days, a big fan of Simon Sinek, it doesn't ask the why, because the why is a navel-gazing exercise and looks inside and out. I want all of you to look outside and in by asking the question, who can you help people become? How can you take each of those things that all of us are struggling with being human, struggling with living more carbon-friendly lives, how can you take that and make it the main driver of your marketing? So maybe it's about making people more mindful runners. And the last thing is, obviously, when do you enable this change? Is that a situation? Is that a specific time in your life? IKEA, obviously, furniture maker, talks about, this is an everyday battle. It's every day, and it's at home. So one of the companies who's been very successful at doing this is Discovery. I'm sure you all know Discovery, right? Health insurance company. Yeah? A few of you? Okay. The interesting thing is they don't talk about a purpose per se that is making the communities healthier. They talk about incentivizing people to live healthier. That's pretty interesting, right? Because they're not putting themselves up on that pedestal, but they're saying incentivizing. It's not their fault if you're not listening to them and you're not going on that run, because they said, we want to incentivize you, not making communities healthier, we're incentivizing you. And the really great thing about them is that they have this program that's called Vitality. So it's one of the most innovative health insurance companies in the world. And what they do with Vitality is saying, if Dan goes to the gym or he dances like a crazy during the carnival tonight, he gets rewarded. Maybe not for the carnival, but at least for the gym, right? If you go and buy fruits and vegetables, you get rewarded. So by helping their customers on their journey, they reward them on each and every step. The interesting thing about that when we talk about the 39% gap is they're really successful at doing that. They've done a study with Apple and the little health app that's in Apple. And the interesting thing is that they've done that with more than 200,000 customers. And the people who take part in Vitality actually succeed exercising 5.1 day more per month. That's a pretty cool achievement, right? I'd be happy if I exercised 5.1 day more per month. So by having a laser-sharp focus on the real tangible change, not that do-good type thing, you can actually succeed. Because my beef with what's happening right now is that, what the fuck, there's no commitment in half of those purpose statements. There's really none. I mean, honestly, if you woke up and you had a mantra above your bed and it said, do good for people and planet, what the fuck are you going to change? I mean, you're going to smile to me? Are you going to be kind to the woman on the bus? What the fuck are you going to do? So think about how laser sharp you can make this promise. And it's really interesting because there's so many tools, there's so many things you can help people with. I mean, as I said, we come from this super disrespectful way of looking at advertising, right? I mean, if people are falling out of love with advertising, it's probably because some of this shit, right? Do we really believe that, So I think it's about time that brands start helping people, playing a meaningful role in people's lives, help us live life. And so there's a couple of ways you can do that. Obviously, you can help us towards maybe a bit more of a climate-friendly lifestyle, And it's really, really clever, this thing, because it's really about feeling a little bit better about yourself when you're doing your dishwashing or your clothes. And even they've been really, really successful at kind of taking that further, expanding that sort of way of being a more sort of conscious, doing conscious laundry. So I talk about having that position, that who. And there's so many who's that you can own out there. If you look at your competitors, if you look at some of the stuff that you want to achieve in your life, if you look at some of your competitors. And quite frankly, it's such an interesting positioning canvas because there's so much you can do. Think about dating apps, right? One would believe that it's not possible to create another fucking dating app, right? Agree? Fuck, there's so many dating apps out there. And yet again, still, as soon as you recognize that, there are problems out there, for you women, there's something about us men just being stupid enough to sending fruit pictures to you guys, vegetable pictures. You shouldn't be doing that. You're laughing too much. Don't, stop doing it. And so, if you think about it, Bumble can be so easy. It can just be saying, okay, what we want to do is we want to create a female-friendly dating app. That's a really good, meaningful difference to play in people's lives. And so, basically, if you look at all the things that we are struggling with as human beings, I said this was anchored in coaching, and this is probably the last model I'm going to show you today. So you can dissect this in so many ways. I dissected it in 12 ways. So many ways you can look at what makes a meaningful life, what makes a good life. When I love sustainability and all this stuff, it's because it's about human stuff. It's not about marketing stuff. It's not about programmatic. It's not about all that shit. It's actually about things that matter. Love, connection with family, all that stuff. And if you take just a snack brand, and you're like, what the fuck can a snack brand do in this world? But if you think about Kind Snacks, and I interviewed Daniel Lipsevsky, their CEO, who's an immigrant from Israel who came to the US and thought about going to do something about that division. And obviously now in the US, oh shit. Even in the UK right now, what the fuck is happening in your country? I love when you're a part of Europe, gotta say that, I miss you guys, please come back. But anyways, we talk about kindness, I'll be kind to you guys as well. But anyways, so the thing he talks about is, in fact, that Kind Snacks is made by ingredients that are kinder to the planet, kinder to the body, and obviously he advocates for kindness. And there's so many interesting things you could do on a platform on kindness. And when you own those human values, it points just not outside the company, but also inside the company, because it's anchored in a human insight. So every year they do a survey within the company and ask the employees, after you started working at Kind Snacks, do you feel kinder? 86% of employees say yes. I think that's a pretty fucking amazing accomplishment, right? So obviously, you know, as you have to do when I'm talking so much shit and I'm claiming all this stuff, you know, is there any substance behind it? So I wanted to do some research trying to understand this even better. So can these brands that play an enabling role, a coaching role in our lives, are they more effective, are they more trustworthy than the classic purposeful brands? So these brands that play a coaching role I call transformative brands. So I wanted to do a piece of research, and I compared two commercials. The first one was from Budweiser. I don't know how many of you saw this one. It aired during a Super Bowl 2 years ago, I think. The whole thing was this little cute dog on a, you know, whatever. But anyway, the claim is, this Bud's for better tomorrow. And the whole thing that Budweiser wanted to tell all of us was that now most of the beer is either produced by wind energy or it's being offset. And again, you know, we hear so much of that language, right? I mean, look at the brands that you're shaping right now. How many of them have better tomorrow? All this fucking language in it. I mean, come on. Let's compare that to this commercial that hopefully all of you know, right? Always Like a Girl, yeah? Whole idea is obviously that like a girl, the sentence, unfortunately, even in my language, still sort of says like, if you run like a girl, you don't run as fast and as well as the boys. So obviously, P&G wanted to change that. We also tested 4 other commercials, but when we look at how that sort of came out, it's really quite interesting, because all of these are obviously tested true and true, but when we look at sort of brand warmth, the sort of fuzzy feeling we get when we're watching the ads, they all do pretty well. So that's not a big change there. When we look at competence, it's interesting, because think about the one approach, Budweiser talks about itself and how great it is, and the other approach, P&G doesn't. There's basically not really any product in the commercial, yet still they seem competent. How the fuck can that be? I don't know how you feel about real estate agents. Yeah, fuck, I hate real estate agents. Honestly, I just hate them. You know, and there's 2 types of real estate agents. I just sold my place in Copenhagen, but anyways. Sorry. So there's one type of real estate agent that comes and says, you know, we sold 100 houses on your street. You know, we're the best fucking real estate agent in the neighborhood. Look at this historic graph and all that shit. And then there's this other real estate agent who would be like, you know, I'll keep a safe distance. Sinus infection is not contagious. But anyway, who sits down and are like, you know, let's have a coffee. You know, what is it that you want? Where are you moving to? Why are you moving? All that stuff. And yet, which one is the fucking most competent? Obviously, you fucking trust the guy who actually cares about you. It's that simple. A lot of this shit is about care. But the really interesting thing is when we look at motivation. So you see the fucking gap here from the purposeful ones going up here to the transformative ones. And there's a difference of 29.6%, which is actually pretty close to the 39% we talked about. So these brands are much fucking better at motivating us to change. And that makes me super happy. Then obviously this year we've done a further research together with GfK where we took 2 new commercials, one from Dove. I sound like a fucking research guy at the moment. Sorry about that, but I'm just trying to prove a point. But we compared 2 commercials, Dove, the reverse selfie. Remember the good old Dove evolution in 2014? Now they've done another one where they talk about how when you do your fucking Instagram thing, don't put all those filters on it. You know, honestly, we guys don't believe you women anyway. You know, when you sort of look like a Kim Kardashian on speed, we don't trust that stuff. But anyways, and compare that to Chipotle one that was run this year that talked about can a burrito change the world. But again, if you look at the numbers, we get much more inspired to take part in the change. We want to know more about the brand, and we actually also feel better about buying the product. But anyways, I think one thing, my second book, The Hero Track, came out during the pandemic. What a shit time for a book to come out. And I was obviously like super concerned whether some of the stuff that I wrote about would still kind of play out. But the really interesting thing is that it's probably even more true now, because I think the one thing that the pandemic taught us was that the best things in life aren't things. It really isn't. It's not what makes us happy. And the problem about brands is that they just talk about stuff all the fucking time, right? And the things that make us human beings, I don't know how many of you, if you look at the YouTube, they had this survey about the sourdough index. I don't know how many of you started doing sourdough, any of you? Some bread, cake bakers, yeah, sure. We all did that. I had this thing that I wanted to, I played a pretty shitty instrument when I was a kid, because I grew up on a small island. I could only choose between the violin and the accordion, so I had to play the accordion. But I thought, hey, I'm gonna play music again. So I picked up the synthesizer, so I spent a bit of time with that. But if you think about all these things, the interesting thing about brands is that if they can help us live life, if they can be the ones that sort of at the top of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is all about self-actualization. And I know self-actualization, or the man in the midlife crisis, we know the honest picture is probably a little bit more like this, right? But if we really think about it, and let me give you a good example. For the most part right now, I think brands are failing when they do fucking retail. When all these stores are closing right now, it makes sense. Why do we need to go down to the store? I mean, you all know IKEA, right? IKEA are famous for breaking up couples. That's what they always do. You're always stuck somewhere in the labyrinth type thing, always get into argument. But anyway, IKEA have changed their store concept and they're rolling out. This is actually one from my neighborhood in Denmark. So rolling out these small stores, 150 square meters, and inside there's a couple of designers that sit and help you design the home that you want. Think about a much more interesting retail experience, because why the fuck should I go down in a store, get lousy service, not be able to compare prices or anything? So again, it's about helping people achieve the things that they want to achieve. So this is an important lesson for all of you guys, is how do you create meaningful connections? How do you create services, products that enable us in all of this stuff? Because this thing about actions, honestly, I hear a lot of brands, and every time I judge award shows these days, I always see these sort of action things from, sort of like innovation gimmicks from advertising agencies. Half of them are not fucking even real. It's just like a little fun case. Because if you guys came up with something that was so revolutionary and compelling and interesting, sure, but 99% of the actions that you guys talk about are not real. And take commitments. I hate corporate commitments, because we want action right now. If there's one thing that's certain out of Glasgow is young people want action right now. Take we hear all these like 2030, 2040, 2050, we're gonna change, right? Give you a good example. When I come home, and this is a fictitious example because I actually don't have a girlfriend anymore, maybe that's the end of the story, but anyway, let's say I come back from London and I take my girlfriend in being unfaithful. She's there with another man, I come home, I was supposed to come home Friday, I come home Thursday. She's there with another man. I get angry, obviously. So she looks at me and she's like, hey, you know what, Thomas? I promise you that towards 2030, I'm gonna be a little bit less unfaithful each year until we're fully back together. How many of you would be buying that shit? And yet still, we're fucking doing that with brands. I don't fucking care if it takes 20, 30, 40 years for you to change. I'm gonna find someone else. I'm gonna fucking sleep with someone else. And that's the thing. Brands don't think we have a choice. We do have a choice. So anyways, this is all about leadership. This is all about creating brands with the right type of leadership. I think it's about time that we sort of step down from the sort of podium and put on the hero cape and the halo, and we really start listening to people. We tap into their dreams, aspirations, we listen to what they're about. Because essentially the best leaders in my life have been leaders that have helped me achieve amazing things, learn me new stuff, a creative director who pushed me further, that fucking biology teacher who really opened my eyes to what a fucking great and amazing thing nature can be. And there's a last thing about this as well. The business case, obviously, as we talked about. bridging that gap of 39%. I think that can be done, as the research showed you, when you build brands that help us on that journey. Secondly, we're in a pretty big mess. I mean, there's a lot of fucking things that are wrong with our social systems, with our planetary systems. So we need to understand how not only brands can help us be part of that thing. Because if we're not all taking part of this, we're not going to succeed. And the last thing about change. At one point when I was 30, I was angry. I thought, I've got better do something. I'm going to build brands that are going to change the world. But I realized something. Because the second book I wrote, because I was so fucking bad at creating change in my own life. Really bad. Every time I was like, I've got to live more carbon friendly, I'm going to be a nicer boyfriend, all that stuff. It's tough to create change in our own lives. And if you think about it, for those of you who try to stop smoking or drinking or whatever it is, you know, your loved ones can tell you, your children can tell you. I mean, they can even try and scare you with those sort of images on the cigarette pack, right? The only thing you do is just avoid the images. You're like, fuck it, I'm still going to smoke. Only one who can create that change is yourself. So I believe that if we're going to create purposeful brands, if we're going to create change, if we want to change the world, all that shit begins with ourselves. So, you know, I started with provocative image of Jesus, so let's end up with one as well. So before we go to the questions, 3 key takeaways. Don't fucking build brands and pretend to be heroes. Try and turn each and every one of us into the heroes. Respect people, show care. Ask them one simple question, not the fucking navel-gazing, why do we exist, we're so fucking important, but who can you in fact help people become? And the last thing, make it as tangible as humanly possible. For those of you who want a small compact version of my book, please support the mission. You can download that scanning this little thing with your phone, I guess. We're at a MadFest conference, I think that's how it works, right, these days. So you can do that. Obviously, you were promised a masterclass, and we are actually at the moment running a masterclass. It's a 12-episode video platform where you can learn all these, the arrow and some of these methodologies. So you can find that on thomaskolster.com. And obviously, if you're really crazy about seeing failed attempts to do vegan recipes, you can obviously follow me on Instagram. And we have time for questions, right, Dan?
Yeah, we do, yeah. Lots of questions come through.
Perfect, cool, perfect.
I think everyone should give Thomas a round of applause for that. I think that was absolutely fantastic.
Thank you. Thanks.
Loads of questions come through on the app. If you do have a question, I'll dash around the audience with a microphone as well. But let's ask this one. Thomas, this is a little bit pessimistic, this question. Yes. Marketers are employed to sell more stuff. Can sustainability and marketing really coexist? You got a view on this?
I love this question. So that was one of the questions I never really got to answer in my first book, to be honest. Because it's like, okay, let's build purposeful brands, blah, blah, blah. With this approach, where it's about self-actualization, where it's about something bigger than actually selling, it's about a human re-evolution, I think we can achieve that. And let me give you a good example. There's a company called District Vision. One of the cases I have in my book as well, started by Tom and Max. What those two guys believe in is they started doing yoga and then they started running, and they found out that, wait a moment, mindful running is actually fucking cool, because when you put your mind and the body together, you run better. So what they do is they sell mindful running classes. So it's not just about the gear that they actually sell, which is running classes, but a lot of it is about helping us understand how sort of the body and the mind works together. And I think those brands are the ones that are the most compelling. So I think we can succeed doing that. And I think a lot of tech platforms at the moment are about that. If you take a brand like Blinkist, you know, these small business books, so you can always keep up to date. I know none of you have time to read. I know that because I sell books. None of you fucking fuckers have time to read. Blinkist is really clever. You have 15 minutes. They help us. They help the business, the business executive. So I think we can succeed, but it needs a change in leadership. It needs a change in the way that we shape brands.
Cool. This is quite an interesting question, I think, around sort of younger generations and Gen Z. So this person's asked, do you think there are any generational differences in terms of how much ethics and sustainability matter? Obviously, a lot of young people here at MadFest today, less so the organisers of MadFest, but should we be looking at the younger generation to actually drive meaningful change in society?
I don't know who asked that question. I'm happy, why are you asking an old fart like me that question? Fuck, I don't know. No idea. No, I think one of the interesting things that are happening right now, which is a study that McCann did, I don't know if there's anybody from McCann here today, that actually made me really happy, was that right now, it's actually our grandparents that are starting to get into this as well. And I'm really happy about that. And it really makes sense, because if you think about it, grandparents are so concerned about, obviously, their grandchildren. And now they're sort of starting to wake up to some of this stuff. So I think we are seeing a sort of generational push right now, which is super exciting. I think what I do see, though, is that especially young people right now are not buying the purposeful shit we're doing. So I think that is super, super clear. Also in the stuff that I showed you from the graph with the sort of Superman that was flying, that was focused on that. Because unfortunately, they just believe that we're in it for the money and we're not in it for the greater good of things.
Cool. We've got a couple more minutes. Are there any questions in the audience? Do raise your hand and I'll dash around with a microphone. But still got a few on the app here.
More than welcome to ask questions. It's not dangerous.
Okay. The carbon footprint of digital advertising has been in the spotlight recently. How should brands reduce their carbon footprint and ensure that they maintain the health of their business? So can you take money out of digital advertising?
Yeah, I think what's happening right now is super, super important, because it's really no difference whether it's Dan or I that has to sort of live a more carbon-friendly lifestyle. We need to stand on that scale, and we need to understand the impact that we have. And remember, still, it's early days. I'm so happy that we're seeing more tools popping up right now that are helping brands understand the carbon footprint of the media choices, that are understanding some of the production consequences. So I'm definitely seeing a shift, and I'm definitely seeing a shift from not just the sort of big brands, but especially some of the smaller brands. Mm-hmm. So I think that will become a new sort of hygiene factor. Slowly but surely. They all have to report. Now, again, I can say that European regulation, UK regulation, who the fuck knows what's going to happen in your little island. But obviously in Europe, we do see a lot of legislative pressure on companies having to report on their climate emissions. And a big part of that's going to be the advertising footprint. I think we've got a hand up there.
We have a question. Yes.
Hey, it's Don Berry from Mammoth. I was interested in what you're saying about vitality and them kind of urging you to kind of do good things, to pay less for your premiums or whatever. The cynic in me says that that's just about them getting more information and then being able to use that information, to sell you more stuff. And the opposite of that, of course, is the insurance companies who, if you have the dash cam or whatever, they can see how fast you drive and all the rest of it. So, question is, do you kind of ignore the population, the cynical population, and just assume that people don't really think about those things? And if so, how do you get around it?
The first part of the question I missed, unfortunately, because I couldn't hear it.
The cynic in Don?
Yeah.
Says that this is more about a data grab and risk and behaviour.
Yeah, so vitality is good. It's you're telling them what you eat, so they know what you like, but they're getting that information.
Yeah.
The other extreme of that is kind of insurance companies seeing how you drive and kind of doing that. So I'm a cynic, so do you ignore the cynics and kind of go with people who maybe don't dig down as much as that?
Really, really interesting question. Did you all hear the question? Yeah, cool. It's just because I'm up here, I can't fucking hear shit. Sorry about the cursing. I think there's two ways you can look at it. I think brands need to get out of that mindset where we control everything, and they need to open much more up towards giving people more choices. So in your case, I would open up for the cynics and say, you know, if you don't want to share your data, there are certain things we can't do. So if you want to drive like a maniac, or you want to drive like you want, you don't want to share your data, your insurance is going to cost this because we don't know your risk. If you're going to share your data, we can cut down on your insurance, so the price is going to be like that. So I think it's very much about offering choices, because I very much believe in there are more and more, and I wouldn't just call it cynics, it's common sense, right? If I want to share my data, you know, I want something back. It's going to be a fair exchange. So I think it's a fair point. So very good question. And I think that we'll see more and more of that, and also how we design websites. I mean, think about how predatory websites are set up in terms of how you design the website to get us to buy more stuff and all of that. I think it's fair if we know it. I mean, if you look at hotels.com right now, finally, they're at least saying that the thing you're seeing in your search are the hotel brands that paid us the most. I think that sort of transparency is super crucial if we want to be serious about that stuff.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll
Shall I
run.
come closer?
No, I'll run down
No,
here.
the
I got
speaker.
my
Okay.
discrete comfort monitor.
Perfect. So I was just thinking about that guy's question actually, and I was thinking about the vitality example, and you were talking about, you know, inspiring people to take action. Does that really work with a vitality model? Because it's incentivizing. Like, it's not really inspiring. It's like, do this and get money off, you know? It's not really like, feel good about yourself. It's reduce your premiums. So it's sort of, but does that matter? I don't know. I'm just thinking because, so I work in health.
Yeah.
So vitality have taken that track.
Yeah.
That's, you don't want to do what vitality has done. It's like, but how could I inspire when it's not about incentivizing, you know, I suppose that's where I got a very specific question. Sorry, everybody, this is my reality and you're having to deal with it.
The more specific questions, the better, I think, because as I said, I think it's really about creating a goal that is so tangible, so the whole organization can work towards it, so the customers understand it. Let's backtrack to the coach example, right? If you sort of take that mindset, and you're like, here's somebody who wants to live healthier, how can we inspire them to do so? What are some of the tips? What are some of the tricks? Maybe some of this sort of more nudging type stuff. You should all go and see Rory Sutherland, who's doing some good behavioral stuff after this session. So you just got to figure out the mechanics, but it can also very much be about owning that position, the who word. So you might want to own mindfulness plus good health. You might want to own family or community plus good health. And how can you activate that? Because a lot of other stuff I talk about seems very sort of like it's about me and all that stuff, but it can easily be about community and so many other things. So, but I think it's a really good point. It's about broadening those notches.
Really, really good question to finish things. Thomas, I thought that was absolutely fantastic. Please put your hands together for Thomas.
Thank
really
you.
great masterclass.
Thank you.